This is Lawmakers, your source for all the news from under the Gold Dome. Here are your anchors, Wandy Lawson and David Zelski.
And coming up on Lawmakers, bills that failed to beat the crossover deadline may in fact find new life.
And a bill that would have created more competition for Georgia hospitals will have to wait until next year.
We'll have highlights of last night's House and Senate action.
And a post-crossover day legislative scorecard. But first, our top story tonight, the Senate presents its version of the supplemental budget. 16 senators representing both parties presented their substitute to the 07 supplemental budget this morning and passed it out of committee this afternoon. Less than 24 hours after receiving House Bill 94, Senate leadership shared their version. Senate President Pro Tem Eric Johnson explains.
The bill that will come out of the committee is a 5-page bill dealing only with the critical needs of state government. It will fund peach care. It will fund the public defenders. It will fund the tornado damage. It will set aside 10% to go into the reserve to continue to build our reserve fund, which is in essence the state savings account.
The House has done a good job at vetting these projects so we're not just throwing away money on something that's not needed. We intend to give these projects full consideration in the 08 budget where we believe they should be placed.
What this is really is a 45-day budget, because by the time the 07 amended is passed and signed by the governor, there will only be roughly 45 days left in the amended period. And that became the basis for our conversation with departments.
Peach care is a priority that we've had as a caucus, and we think that it's very important to sustain that program, as well as the public defender and the other items that are presented in this budget. We think there will be other opportunities in the larger budget to do some of the other things that our caucus, as well as the Senate as a whole and the House members would want to do. But at this juncture, we think this is an appropriate step to make, and we are going to be supportive of it as a caucus.
Around 3 o'clock this afternoon, the full Senate Appropriations Committee met to discuss these changes. Committee Chair Jack Hill explains the goal of this budget.
When you add the three big areas, the reserve payment of $20 million, which is 27% of the add by the Senate, the 42% is dedicated to health needs, to peach care and other health needs, and then 26% for education. That's like 80% of this add is dedicated just to those three areas.
Budget goes towards education, health care, and the reserve fund. Other funds include $11 million to match a federal grant to cover disaster assistance for victims of tornadoes earlier this month near Americus, Georgia, and $6.2 million to fund a shortfall in the Public Defender Standards Council. That's down from the $9.6 million allocated in the House version. Conspicuously absent from the Senate version are any funds for Governor Sonny Perdue's Go Fish initiative or land conservation program. The Senate also eliminated House-backed funding for several projects, such as $5 million for the National Infantry Museum in Columbus and $1 million for the Tour de Georgia bike race. A controversial bill that would have allowed employees to keep firearms on company property never saw debate in the Senate last night. Senate leadership decided to adjourn before the bill came up. Several other bills at the bottom of the calendar were casualties of the move. Lawmakers' Jesse Freeman is live at the Capitol with more. Jesse.
Well, David, Senator Chip Rogers sponsors Senate Bill 43. He says he knew his bill was in jeopardy late last night as the hour grew late.
I thought constitutionally we were on the right side. I think it's a good thing. I think we should always attempt to protect Georgians and certainly allow Georgians to protect themselves, as Senate Bill 43 would have done. But I understand other people had concerns about the bill. We're still going to work through the process.
Now, the bill is dead, but the measure may get new life if it is amended onto an existing bill that affects the same code section of the state's law code. That is what would have to happen for several bills that were lost, including Senator Emanuel Jones' attempt to make sex offender legislation retroactive. That could possibly free convicted felon Janarlo Wilson, who would be free under current law. Jones was noticeably upset.
Very disappointed. Janarlo's mother was here the whole afternoon, and I really wanted to put the effort and the energy to this legislation, not just for her son, but also for her. And I saw the passion on her face when I had to tell her that we were adjourning before we got to our bill.
A Senate bill requiring abortionists to offer ultrasounds was also next.
It was tough, but fortunately we had been tracking two of these bills having to do with the sonogram or ultrasound, and so we have the bill in the House. It has already passed out of the House, and I'll be speaking to it tomorrow.
Also lost was a measure to allow billboard companies to cut down trees on highways.
It gives us time to regroup and see how we can pass it in the near future or maybe the next session.
But Senator Mullis may be a part of settling incorporation disputes between cities and counties.
We're always glad here in the General Assembly that the cities groups and the counties group come together and work the issue out before it goes through our chambers.
We did that under the leadership of the House. We had elected officials from our organization and elected officials from the Georgia Municipal Association come together for a full-day meeting. They met from 10 o'clock in the morning till about 4 o'clock that afternoon. And the staff was not in the room. We were not involved in the negotiations, and they worked out a compromise. And the compromise language that they worked out is reflected in the language on House Bill 2.
So cities and counties will have the opportunity to settle some differences with House Bill 2, a measure being pushed in the Senate by the ACCG that would change de-annexation procedures was another casualty of crossover day. Reporting live, I'm Jesse Freeman for Lawmakers.
Thank you, Jesse. The House passed only 2 resolutions today, one supporting family literacy projects and another urging school districts to teach patriotism. Yesterday's lengthy House calendar included passage of a revision to the class size mandates for high school. House Bill 332 would have given systems 2 additional years to reduce class sizes to 28 in core subjects. But an amendment by Education Chair Brooks Coleman allows local systems to increase that number to 33.
Your mathematics is correct, but what you fail to realize is that we have still austerity cuts. If we go ahead and pass the bill as is, we would force the systems to go to 28 without any flexibility. Immediately they'd have to have extra classrooms, find the extra teachers. They're not ready for it. We have not provided funds locally for this. And so what we're simply doing by this amendment, those schools that are ready, and we have many that are already at 28, this allows them to stay there. They can go lower, or they could go to 31, 29, whatever they would like.
But under the original bill, it would be put off for 2 years, but isn't it true it'd only be around 28? But this establishes it not for a time frame, but forever.
No, sir,
the 40% variance in those 4 critical areas, that if you believe in smaller classrooms in those 4 critical areas where we feel like students need that extra attention, then you would vote against the amendment and the bill.
No, sir, I disagree. I believe if you believe in local control, you believe in parents having input, teachers having input, you would vote for this amendment because it allows the lower class size, but it allows input with the local boards to try to establish your class sizes.
Now, later, Education Committee member Rob Tilley went to the well to oppose the amendment, saying that it had not been discussed in committee.
I would raise the objection that it hasn't been vetted in committee. We didn't have the hearing. I don't know where this amendment came from. We've seen argument, debate over the numbers, whether it's an improvement over system-wide averaging or whether it's worse than system-wide averaging. And we can't feel 100% confident sitting in our chairs voting on this right now as to which the answer is. Is it better? Is it worse? The people of this state have said in election after election that they want smaller class sizes. And we have told them in campaign after campaign that we're going to give them smaller class sizes. And year after year we've come in this General Assembly and we've not done it. We've found a reason to stop it, and we're doing it again. We're doing it at a time that we're telling our people we have plenty of money, $500 million surplus.
The Coleman amendment did pass, and as did House Bill 232 by a vote of 104 to 64, and it now moves to the Senate. One of the more controversial bills that did not make it through on crossover day in the House is one that would have allowed general surgeons to open their own outpatient facilities, thus creating more competition for hospitals. Lawmaker Sandra Parrish joins us live with more. Sandra.
In Wadi, House Bill 337 was just one of many bills dealing with certificates of need. Many thought it was a long shot to pass this session and were surprised when the Speaker called it up late last night. But in a procedural move, before debate even began, the House voted to recommit it to House rules, thus killing the measure this session.
What purpose does Representative Chanel rise before I recognize the author of this bill?
Make a motion, Mr. Speaker.
What kind of motion do you wish to make?
Mr. Speaker, due to the complexity of this subject matter and the lateness of the hour, I make a motion to recommit House Bill 337 to the House Rules Committee.
Isn't it true that if we want to take a step forward in addressing the issue of certificate of need and provide greater access to health care and lower costs to the fine folks of Georgia, we would vote no on this motion?
I believe that's what the gentleman believes.
It was Representative Mickey Chanel who asked for a motion to recommit House Bill 337, and on a vote of 112 to 52, the House agreed.
General surgeons are not recognized as a single specialty because, in part, because they operate on several parts of the body rather than one. That was the issue. But the larger issue with 337 is that it was actually one part of the overall issue that we've been trying to deal with. In my view, that was the major problem with it, is that it was being acted on separately from the overall issue. That is an issue that deserves our attention, and we need to do something about it. But I think we need to do something about it within the context of the entire CON issue and not a standalone issue.
I would have much preferred, and I would have been very happy to cast a yes vote.
Representative Jill Chambers would have at least liked to have seen 337 debated. She, in fact, supports doing away with certificates of need altogether.
Well, Certificate of Need, also called CON, is nothing more than restriction of health care. It is it's the government's way of limiting health care options to the citizens of Georgia.
Representative Chanel, who sits on the special CON committee in the House, says he fully expects a comprehensive CON bill to pass next year that incorporates many of the measures proposed this year, including a plan by Governor Perdue. Reporting live from the Capitol, I'm Sandra Parrish for Lawmakers.
Thank you very much, Sandra. Legislation drafted at request of the Sheriff's Association dealing with sex offenders passed the Senate last night. Senate Bill 219, sponsored by Senator Bill Hamrick, pertains to vehicles used by sex offenders during criminal activity.
To deal with the problem of people committing the crimes of rape, sodomy, child molestation, aggravated child molestation, enticing a child for indecent purposes, and aggravated sexual battery when a vehicle is involved. A lot of these crimes are facilitated by the use of vehicles to entice children to engage in this kind of conduct, and this bill sets up a procedure under our current forfeiture statutes to condemn the vehicle and allow the vehicle to be sold and the proceeds to be kept by the state so that the vehicle can't be used in these types of crimes and as further punishment for these offenders.
Senate Bill 219 passed unanimously, and so did Senate Bill 249, a bill supported by all 159 Georgia sheriffs that prohibits where a sex offender can reside, work, and volunteer. However, it does allow leniency to disabled sex offenders in certain situations.
Requiring the sex offender to register in multiple counties if they work or attend school outside their county of residence. Requiring that palm prints be taken in addition to fingerprints and other information makes clear that the sex offender must report in person to the sheriff, and you might have one of these that has been handed out upon the order of Superior Court can waive the residency requirement for sex offenders permanently disabled, capacitated or incapacitated, or who have reached the age of 75 or older, at least 10 years have passed since being released from prison.
Again, both sex offender bills debated last night passed unanimously and go to the House.
The House, meanwhile, yesterday agreed to curtail spending for indigent defense in murder cases. Representative David Ralston said House Bill 586 could rein in spending in cases like that of alleged courthouse shooter Brian Nichols.
It limits the number of attorneys that can be appointed by the court to 2, so there can't be more than that unless there is one exception to that I'll come to in a minute. And it sets the hourly rate to be paid at $95 an hour, or sets it at, at the rate that's approved by the council, which is currently is $95 an hour. And I think it would avoid some problems that have generated some discussion in a fairly significant case down the street here in terms of the number of outside attorneys brought in and what they're being paid.
House Bill 586 passed without opposition and moves to the Senate. Libraries will not be exempted from obscenity laws, according to a bill adopted yesterday in the House. The version of House Bill 226 that came to the floor excluded academic institutions and libraries from criminal prosecution for possession or distribution of materials deemed obscene.
This would simply give public librarians the same protection from arrest that we now give the other groups here, which are members of college faculties and college students and persons who have a prescription. So it treats them just as we treat colleges now.
Okay. Will the gentleman further yield?
I yield.
Is it not true that most librarians wish that they would have no restrictions?
Well, I don't know any librarians that well, and the ones that I do know, I've never understood resisted restrictions, or at least the ones in my community don't. I mean, we have very fine, responsible librarians up there, and I'm comfortable with the way that my children have used their libraries over the years, so I have never perceived that they resist restriction.
Representative Bobby Franklin introduced an amendment to remove the library exemption from the bill because he said it offered unfair protections.
Without this amendment, what you will be saying is it is okay for the staffs at the libraries to stock pornography, obscenity, and make it available to our children without any repercussions like any other purveyors of obscenity would have. And this is very important for the young people of Georgia. We don't need them to be able to go into the libraries and have this material available to them when we don't want anybody else to make it available to them, and we're not giving them that exemption as well.
The Franklin Amendment did pass the House, and House Bill 226 passed by a vote of 129 to 35. It moves to the Senate.
Legislation that aims to fight identity theft also passed the Senate last night. Senator Chip Rogers sponsors Senate Bill 236, known as the Personal Identity Protection Act.
It essentially contains three major sections. In Section 1, we add what are known as public entities to the list of people who would have to report a data breach or a security breach. Unfortunately, about 80% of these security breaches occur through colleges and universities, many of them, of course, public colleges and universities. They would now have to report those security breaches. Section 3, or I should say Section 4, rewrites the definition of identity fraud. The current statute, which was good for quite some time, dealt with identity fraud only if your resources were appropriated. In other words, someone basically had to steal money from you. Under this new definition, anybody committing identity fraud would be using your identifying information intentionally and in a fraudulent manner. And then section number 5 says that if you believe you are the victim of identity fraud, you may contact local law enforcement. They would be required to give you an incident report that you could then use to take to your creditors.
Senate Bill 236 passed by a vote of 51 to 0 and goes to the House.
A third supplemental calendar yesterday brought House Bill 2 to the floor and led to the passage of that measure to manage how the Department of Community Affairs oversees the annexation of unincorporated areas. HB 2 also establishes a format for dispute resolutions.
Objections will be arbitrated by a panel of 5 drawn from pools of academic, elected county, and elected municipal officials to be created by DCA. They will be trained for this role. No panel members may be from the affected county, and all deliberations are subject to open meeting laws.
I guarantee you the solution that you have in front of you is not the right one to try to solve this problem. Also, I have a question about the constitutionality of this bill. If you turn to page 4 and look under line 22 from there on down, it is my opinion that you're giving away the authority of what elected officials are supposed to do in cities, and you're handing it to a panel of unelected officials not from that area. That's not the right thing to do, and I think that's going to cause more problems in the future.
HB 2 passed 156 to 14 and now moves to the Senate. Representative Tyrone Brooks went to the well this afternoon to thank his colleagues for the undisputed passage last night of a resolution condemning the genocide in the Darfur region of Sudan.
I just want you to know that Georgia has now joined the international movement to end the genocidal war in the Sudan, particularly in Darfur. And maybe our little contribution will impress upon Congress, the UN, the African Union, and other forces around the world to do more to end this genocidal campaign. So I just want to thank you today. I know we do have some remaining business and rules. I want to say that to my caucus members in the Legislative Black Caucus. We have some remaining business and rules, and Chairman Earhart has committed to work with us during the remaining 9 days. The session is not over. We don't sign and die for another 9 days. But thank you very much for your support, and we'll continue to work together. Thank you very much.
Brooks is also the sponsor of House Resolution 121, calling for the display of the portraits of civil rights icons in the Capitol. It was on the House calendar yesterday, but never came up for a vote.
Georgians who do not want public buildings and roads named after them are one step closer to having a registry to stop it. Senate Bill 191, sponsored by Senator Robert Brown, creates this registry for people, such as himself, who don't want these things named after him.
We could actually lose part of our history if we were to do this in such a way with folks such as yourself that in all sincerity and humility would want to place their name out of this process, may indeed deserve to be recognized at some point. So I asked that question, have you thought about that? And
I had not thought about it in those terms, Senator, but since you raised it, I don't know that having a name on a bridge that somebody rides by and sees does anything as far as informing history. If you've done something significant enough to have a few chapters in a book, whatever, I would think that would be something significant enough that people would need to know about.
Now, Senate Bill 191 passed with only 2 dissenting votes and now goes over to the House.
Telecommunications technology is allowing some companies to pocket money intended to fund the 911 system, according to supporters of House Bill 394. Representative John Lunsford encouraged the House to bring the Georgia Telecom Code up to date.
What has actually occurred is in 1977 we created the 911 centers where the counties operated and answered the calls. In 1988, I believe it was Jimmy Skipper updated the code section to include all technology at that point in time. But from 1988 to 2007, the technology has outran the legislation, and we've created a loophole in the law. And that loophole has allowed some providers to either A, collect 911 fees from the customers and not remit it to the local governments, or in some other cases not collect the fees and operate outside through that loophole.
The House passed HB 394 without dissenting vote. It moves to the Senate. With crossover day behind us and fewer than 10 legislative days left, we take a look at the status of some key legislation. The budgets are the only constitutionally required pieces of legislation. The House adopted the supplemental budget last week, but political wrangling between the House and Senate stalled the transmittal of HB 94 to the Senate until yesterday. The mid-year budget is now in the Senate Appropriations Committee. The big budget has yet to make it to the House floor. It is currently in the House Appropriations Committee. In business, those who want to see payday lending return to Georgia will have to try again next year. 2 attempts to garner the necessary votes on the House floor failed. HB 163 is dead for this year. City of Dunwoody proponents have cleared their first hurdle. Senate Bill 82 passed the Senate and is currently in the House Governmental Affairs Committee, where Chairman Austin Scott says he wants to proceed cautiously. The Senate yesterday passed a measure adding townships as a municipal designation between city and unincorporated area. On the criminal justice front, HB 115, which would drop the requirement that attorneys who take the state bar exam be graduates of accredited law schools, failed to pass committee and is dead. The Senate killed Senator Emanuel Jones' attempt to reduce the sentence of Gennarlo Wilson, who was convicted for a sex act with a teenager 2 years his junior. SB 145, creating the sentence of life without parole for murder charges, passed the Senate and is currently in House Judiciary non-civil. The House agreed that a death penalty sentence can be handed down without a unanimous verdict. House Bill 185 is currently in the Senate Judiciary Committee. Turning to education, the governor's proposed constitutional amendment to use lottery funds solely for the pre-K program and Hope scholarships cleared the Senate yesterday. Lieutenant Governor Casey Cagle's plan to create charter school districts passed the Senate and is currently in House rules. SB 9, the Grade Integrity Act, to protect teachers from being forced to change students' grades, has cleared the Senate and is in the House Education Committee. And the annual sales tax break on school supplies and energy-efficient appliances has been approved by the House. It is currently in the Senate Finance Committee. The biofuel tax credit has passed the House and is currently in the Senate Finance Committee. Some of the issues suggested by citizens on the GeorgiaSpeaks.com website are making their way through the General Assembly. A measure prohibiting sex offenders from photographing minors passed the Senate and is currently under consideration in House Committee. Likewise, SB 34, prohibiting inmate display of victim photographs, passed the Senate and is in the House Judiciary Non-Civil Committee. A measure limiting special elections to March and November made its way through the Senate and is now in House Committee. The long-disputed requirement that seatbelts be worn in pickup trucks has cleared the Senate with the promise of millions of dollars in federal funds if it clears both houses. House Agriculture and Consumer Affairs is currently considering SB 86. 2 ID bills have cleared the Senate. SB 5, allowing the governor to override the 2008 federal deadline for issuing a national standard ID, passed the Senate and is in House Motor Vehicles. And proof of Georgia's citizenship in the form of a driver's license would be required if SB 38 becomes law. Those who favor making English Georgia's official language failed to move HB 21 out of committee. It is dead for this session. The Senate agreed to SB 23, allowing immigration status to be considered in the parole process. Following contentious debate, the House yesterday passed Speaker Glenn Richardson's proposal to overhaul the Peach Care insurance program by changing the income threshold from 236% of poverty to 200% and removing the children of illegal immigrants from the program. Governor Perdue's super speeder legislation passed the Senate, paving the way for hefty fines for those exceeding the speed limit. Meanwhile, the governor's faith-based funding initiative to direct state money to religious organizations has failed again to pass the General Assembly. Representative Bobby Franklin's proposal to ban all abortions in the state did not clear committee. The House added to the Women's Right to Know Act a provision that if a woman seeking an abortion is given an ultrasound, she must be offered the opportunity to view it. House Bill 147 is currently in the Senate Health and Human Services Committee. And that's the scorecard on Legislative Day 31.
For those of you with access to the internet, you can watch Lawmakers online. Visit our website at gpb.org for more information. Click on Watch Online, then follow the instructions for watching live or looking at past Lawmaker programs in our archives. That website address again is gpb.org. Just another way we keep you apprised of what's going on at the General Assembly.
And we'd like to recommend a website that's a valuable resource for information about the General Assembly. Go to www.legis.ga.gov. That website is a great research tool that we at Lawmakers use on a regular basis. Well, coming up tomorrow on Lawmakers, Crossover Day recovery continues with light calendars in both the House and Senate. However, committee action heats up. We'll have all the highlights and the latest from Under the Gold Dome tomorrow night at 7. And if you've missed any part of this Lawmakers broadcast, be sure to tune in tomorrow morning when Lawmakers repeats at 5:30 a.m. Now, stay tuned for Georgia Outdoors. Tonight's episode features an environmental progress report. Georgia Outdoors is coming up next year on GPB.
And that is our broadcast for this, the 31st legislative day of the Georgia General Assembly. I'm David Zelski.
And I'm Wandi Lawson. Thanks so much for joining us and have a great evening.
This has been a production of Georgia Public Broadcasting.